JCI News. Today's focus is on Japan's imperialism of China. Before this imperialization period, China was strictly ruled by the Qing or Manchu dynasty. The Qing once had powerful rulers at the beginning of their reign, bringing prosperity to China. But late in their rule, the Qing were struck by many natural disasters and rebellions, and inept ruling courts that weakened their power, encouraging the Chinese Civil War in 1912. The war didn't end until 1949, but over that time period, China was considered a republic. This war spanned over such a great time period because it was interrupted by the Second Sino-Japanese War, in which Japan invaded China. To find out why Japan attacked and internally weakened China, let's flip over to Dr. Sadam. Welcome, Dr. Sadam. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So, Doctor, what do you think were the motives for the Japanese to imperialize China?
Well, Japan was an island nation, and as an island nation, it was literally cut off from the rest of the world. It was surrounded by great military power, so it was no wonder that it would want to further its own military might. As an island, it was also very in a shortage of raw materials. And because Havre was not cultivatable, the need for raw materials definitely comes into play. Another factor was the desire for political expansion, more land, more power. But I feel the most driving force was the survival instinct. Japan saw how Europe was imperializing the countries around it and knew that it would set its eyes on East Asia. So Japan, now wanting to be imperialized, thought the best way to survive was to imperialize East Asia themselves. It was a survival instinct, you know. They were trying to tell the European powers that we are the predator, not the prey.
Okay. So, what type of government did the Japanese set up in China, and what do you think were the imperialistic powers? How did they modernize China?
Well, Japan set up a military government of sorts. Since at that time, military extremists pushed their way into foreign affairs. They thought the best way to expand and gain more land was through military ways. Of course, the Chinese, seeing this, realized that their traditional ways and culture would not have worked. So I wouldn't say that Japan modernized China, but they pushed China to modernize.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sadam, and back to the newsroom with myself. Next time, just cut to the interview, okay? Capiche?
Fine.
Okay. So, fighting between the Imperial Japanese forces and China began on July 7th, 1937 at the Marco Polo Bridge. A month later, the Battle of Shanghai and the Nanking Massacre occurred, and were the first major events of the Second Sino-Japanese War. The Nanking Massacre, or the Rape of Nanking, was one of the bloodiest, most controversial events of the war. Now we go to the granddaughter of a survivor of the Nanking Massacre. Welcome to the show. So can you talk about what happened when the Japanese first came?
I remember my great-grandmother told me this story. To this day, it's still haunted. The victory of the Sino-Japanese War in Shanghai during World War II directed the Japanese to turn their attention to Nanjing, thus followed the 6-week period known as the Nanjing Massacre, or the Rape of Nanjing.
Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist leader of that time, removed all troops in Nanjing in fear of losing them in a battle. This left the city undefended and vulnerable to the Japanese attacks. The International Committee for the Nanjing Safety Zone attempted to set up refugee camps before the arrival of their enemies. However, the abandonment of the Chinese government in December 1st, 1937, led to the overpopulation in the safety zone when the International Committee evacuated all remaining citizens under their protection. In the Nanjing Massacre, tens and thousands of people were raped and killed. Most women were killed after they were raped. The dead man could not report anything. Women from all ages were victims of this gang rape and later killed and mutilated. Men, on the other hand, were taken away as prisoners. They were promised food and work, but received none at all, and then taken to an isolated area. There, men were killed separately in groups of 12. Sometimes the Japanese soldiers would split the amount of prisoners in half and host a shooting contest to determine who could kill the fastest. Teams of Japanese soldiers used swords or guns to kill these men while the other prisoners watched. Aside from that, atrocious forms of torture were also inflicted on the men. They would nail prisoners to wood planks and run them over with tanks, electrically shock them on electrical posts, or even carve long strips of flesh one by one off their bodies. It's understandable that on the anniversary of the Nanjing Massacre, hordes of Chinese people sacked and raided the Japanese town in China.
Wow, I know it must be hard talking about such dark times in your country. Thank you for sharing. On the opposing side of this troublesome event are the Japanese. Here's the Japanese representative. So what is your opinion on this controversial event?
The Nanjing Massacre never occurred. Everything was elucidated by the Chinese Communist Party to Japan in that light. We have kept quiet about all this slander for several years, but after constantly listening to China's annoying shrieks, we have decided to come out to the international scene. China says that Japan raped more than 80,000 women. However, where is the proof? Why have there been no children found of both Chinese and Japanese descent?
That's because you killed all them.
Where is the proof? Where are the graves of the mothers? Why have there been no dead bodies found? This is a ruse created by the Chinese Communist Party. All the supposed witnesses are from the Chinese Communist Party. We cannot trust them.
这些日本人啊，都多少年了还不承认呢？
Well, that's all the time we have. Unlike the Japanese, the Chinese were totally unprepared for the war at the start. They first tried to drag the war for as long as possible, which they were able to do because it waged for 8 more years, through the Second World War. Japan's control of China peaked in 1940 when they controlled all of Manchuria, Shandong, Anhui, as well as Korea, Taiwan, and other parts of Southeastern Asia. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, sparking the Allies to sign a formal declaration of war on the Axis powers of Japan, Italy, and Germany. China then received foreign aid from the Allies, helping them in the Sino-Japanese War. The Second World War and the Sino-Japanese War was ended with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945. The official papers ending the bloodiest war in human history and the Second Sino-Japanese War were signed by Emperor Hirohito on September 2nd, 1945. In 1945, China emerged from the war as a great military power, but economically weak and on the verge of all-out civil war. The economy was drained by the military demands of a long, costly war, internal conflict, uncontrollable inflation, and corruption in the nationalist government. Another war was on the horizon. Talks broke down between the Chinese Nationalists and the Chinese Communist Party, unleashing another full-scale war. On October 1st, 1949, the Communist Party proclaimed the People's Republic of China with its capital, Beiping, later named Beijing. This marks the start of the communist rule in China. Millions of citizens and soldiers were lost, but China did benefit out of imperialism with Japan. China wouldn't be anywhere near what it is today without Japanese imperialism. Now to an interview with a woman straight from China who's voicing her opinion on this time period in history. Hello. Oh, can you speak English? Okay, here we are. Thank you for agreeing to this interview. How do you think Japanese imperialism has affected the Chinese, and were there any lasting effects?
When our economical, national, and religious identity was ruined by the imperialists, we did not know how to stand on our own as a nation. Our nation, having been thrust into a modern world, had to compromise culture and traditions in order to not be swept up by the crowd. It was the Japanese imperialism that caused us to form and reform a new and working government that caused most people to be satisfied. Without the Japanese to push us, we would not have prospered. The Japanese's powerful growth in China caused us to be filled with the passion to take them down, though they unknowingly made it possible for us to become a major economic contributor to the world, even surpassing the Japanese themselves. The areas that Japan had occupied
had grown rapidly under Japan, so when we won independence, China was well off financially and governmentally wise.
There we have it. Thank you, Miss, for your time and words. After the 1970s, China became one of the most successful economic countries. China is the world leader in gross value of industrial output in mining and ore processing of iron, steel, coal, aluminum, and other metals, machine building, armaments, textiles and apparel, petroleum, cement, chemicals, fertilizers, all consumer products, food processing, all transportation equipment, telecommunication equipment, commercial space launch vehicles, and satellites. In recent years, China has renovated its support for state-owned enterprises for economic security, looking to foster global competitive industries. The dollar value of China is on the rise comparatively to those of the US. The population growth of China, though, still makes its per capita income lower than the world average. Currently, the Chinese government faces some economic challenges, mostly due to the recession of 2008. Thank you. That's all the time we have. And next time, the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. Fertilizer, all consumer products, food processing, all transportation equipment, telecommunication equipment, commercial space launch vehicles, satellites.
Anthology.
Welcome to So, Doctor, what do you think of the model for
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary to use modern Chinese version.
What is your opinion on
I think this is okay. Okay.